The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct.
The man in the candy van has finally been caught. Talking, of course, about Sean P. Diddy Combs, or Love, or Puff Daddy, or whatever it is that he wants to be called this week. The not-so-secret industry creep has finally been arrested in New York on multiple charges. There's definitely more charges to come based on the information in the indictment itself, as well as the evidence that they've alluded to finding within his mansion. Like is often the case in Hollywood and the greater music industry as a whole, everyone seems to just ignore this information until it comes out what a problem it is. Before, no one really wanted to talk about it unless there was an outlier here or there whose word really couldn't be trusted.
I happen to know Diddy boys. It's nasty. It's nasty.
But now everyone seems to have their own story that they've not been willing to tell until just now. And his crimes have gone on for so long, at least 30 years that we know of. And that's everything from SA to straight up murder. Of course, until he's found guilty, everything that's said here is alleged. And this will also 100% have to be a multi-part video that's a deep dive. We're gonna go over the current charges that he's facing, but there's a long history of many things that have been done both by himself and the people that are around him that have to be covered. There's a lot of information to go over and a lot of follow-up that will happen. And if you don't want to miss that follow-up, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a thing. But let's go ahead and look at the mountain range of accusations and crimes that the internet has dubbed the Diddy Diddler. And this seems to be an event or multiple events where Diddy, amongst other people within the industry, sex workers, other general people, all come together to satisfy whatever desires they may have. Even though this is labeled as a freak off, and maybe that just sounds like some sort of event, really this comes down to assault. And this is assault not only of sex workers, but also people within the industry, both current and people who have fallen out of the limelight. And there is a reason for all of that. What I also find strange is that he sort of knew these charges were coming. There was a big gap between the raids that happened on his mansion, other homes, and other places of business, that happening in March of this year, 2024, and his current charges. According to his lawyer, this was intentional. He wanted to be seen as less of a flight risk, so he presented himself for the charges that he knew were incoming.
What prosecutors were arguing is not only does your client pose a flight risk, because obviously he's incredibly wealthy, has access to planes and a lot of staff. This is someone who's attempted to bribe security staff and has already threatened and interfered with witnesses.
Mr. Combs came to New York on September 5th. As soon as we realized that this indictment was going to be coming down in a matter of weeks, maybe months, but sometime soon, Mr. Combs got on a plane, left his home in Florida, flew to New York. I called the prosecutors myself. I said, Mr. Combs is in New York. Do you want to know where he is? If you want to know where he is, I'll tell you where he is, but he wants to surrender.
But that does lead to more questions about how he knew those exact charges were coming, as well as what would have happened if he didn't. How long would it have taken these prosecutors to come forward with these charges? How did these all line up just so perfectly? Which seems to be one of the only pieces missing so far from this story. There's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of breakdown of exactly what has happened over the course of many years, but this seems to be so far unanswered. On Monday, September 16th, Sean Diddy Combs was arrested, and he was arrested on 3 charges based off of an indictment from a grand jury. And for those of you who don't know, a grand jury is sort of like a regular jury in a trial, except this isn't a trial. This is sort of a pre-motion. What happens is the state or prosecutor's office introduces evidence to a group of people, similar to a group of people that would be in a standard jury. They present their initial evidence, and the intent of this is not to determine guilt or innocence. The only intent is to know if there is enough evidence to bring forth charges. That grand jury did determine that there are 3 charges that there were enough evidence to, at the very least, bring those charges forward. That being racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in the act of prostitution. There is a pattern of crimes listed on this indictment, both against Diddy himself and the enterprise surrounding him, which is just his group of people, some employed, some not, which has been labeled the Combs Enterprise. And this isn't a legal entity, it's not an LLC, it's not being registered anywhere. This is just a group of people, both that he employs and that he doesn't, that has the interest of Diddy himself, as well as his businesses in mind. Now, this pattern was listed very clearly. It was listed as forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice, all in the first page of the indictment. These accusations and pattern of behavior is not just solely pointed at Diddy, though he is at the moment the only one charged. The indictment goes on to mention the uses that both Combs Enterprise and Diddy used to recruit people for these freak-offs and for people in his general orbit. Now, most of these people, both men and women, were lured into his circle with some sort of romantic relationship or otherwise a leg into the industry of music, acting, alcohol, spirits, anything that he has a foot in, they were sort of offered a way in. Once it became readily apparent that wasn't what was going to happen, at least in most cases, the table sort of began turning, and turning really rapidly. The indictment lists off a bunch of ways that the Combs Enterprise, as well as Diddy himself, used to intimidate these people. That was threats of force, coercions, forcing these people to engage in these so-called freak-offs, while also recording it and using that for blackmail. And this wasn't just happening locally. He wasn't just going to the local club, plucking out people, and moving about his day. This was both over state lines and internationally.
We out here, you know, on the Amalfi Coast, you know, wherever I go, y'all go.
People were intentionally chosen to be the victim of Diddy Combs.
You know what I'm saying? The fuck? Shit started out in the Bronx, man. Look where this shit is at now.
That is where the charge of the transportation comes into play, because he was moving these people over state lines and internationally for the sole purpose of his sexual gratification. Now, these incidents, freak-offs, whatever it is you want to call them, would often last days at a time. And that's mostly due to the aid of multiple substances. With those substances, he was able to stay up for days at a time. And I do mean that as a double-edged innuendo. He was able to stay up for days at a time. And this wasn't just him. This was the people in his circle, this was people from the industry, and these were the victims of Diddy Combs. Oftentimes, these substances were not only given to make sure that everyone was to stay awake for these multiple days in a row, but also so that they would remain compliant and pliable. If you are so messed up on substances that you have no idea what's even going on around you, you're much more likely to allow things to slide. There is even a clip of an old interview that he just readily admitted some of the tactics that he takes, including changing the air temperature, making sure the alcohol was digested properly through their bodies. That includes keeping locks on doors strategically to make sure that people couldn't leave. I'll let him explain further here.
They just, you know, so you have, if you don't have what they need, they're gonna leave.
Right.
Gotta keep them there.
Right.
You need locks on the doors.
Okay, this is sounding kind of dangerous now.
It's a little kinky, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
rock with me, but just check it out. You need a lot of heat. A lot of heat. Yeah.
Heat. You mean that physically the place has to be hot?
You don't have no air conditioning.
No air conditioning.
No.
Why is that?
Heat affects the alcohol, and it also affects, like, you know, everybody gets a little bit more comfortable and loose. Builds up a nice little sweat.
And after all of this, provided they weren't injured, which we'll get into later, at the very minimum, everyone has to do these IV drips to make sure that they recover both from the substances, from being up so long, and being rehydrated, because on a diet of alcohol and cocaine for days at a time, you would need it.
Introduce you to my mom, called Mom Dukes.
Hi.
She's getting a drip with me. She's hydrating. What's up, Mom?
I love you.
I love you too.
Now, these are listed as acts with commercial sex workers. So yes, they were paid to be there. However, the circumstances were never as agreed upon, to be clear. So there should not be on any form, from any side, any defense against the acts that were done against the sex workers. Just because you're paid to do a job doesn't mean you can be forced to do other things, ever, in any circumstance. Now, these efforts, while typical of a creep or a creep network, are also really specific in the indictment, which leads me to believe that either this is pulled directly from a recording from the many, many cameras that are throughout his mansion and other homes, or there's a specific person or persons giving these play-by-plays of these events, because you don't get these specifics just from general knowledge. And I do have to wonder how this guy sleeps between not only his moral lapse in judgment, but also all the enterprises that he has under his name. I mean, he has recording studios, he has his own alcohol line, he has his own music that he still produces, even though I don't know who's listening to it. He has connections to TV networks and multiple other side businesses. And this wasn't and never was random events. This didn't just naturally and organically happen. This was planned from the very beginning to the very end and the cleanup afterwards. This is both of his home and hotel rooms. It specifically listed the methods used for cleanup, the products used to gather beforehand. Everyone knows about the thousands of bottles of lube and baby oil. You don't just randomly get a collection of thousands of bottles of lube and baby oil. The items listed that were brought ahead of time are pretty indicative of what sort of night he intended to have. That includes controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the fact, to making sure to have a dedicated staff to do so there was no evidence left behind. This even came down to pre-prepping to make sure to arrange for travel for these victims, for the sex workers, for the people from the industry that were involved. There was a lot of cash that was on hand, and that was to make sure that people of the hotel were quiet and minded their own business. The sex workers were adequately compensated, if you could even say that, to make sure that they were quiet and that they left after the fact, even while injured, even while violated, to make sure that they had hush money. Now, it isn't being labeled as that. That's really the only label that you could put on this sort of cash being exchanged. In this section is also the part that most people are focusing on. It's the part where the evidence listed, amongst other things, is over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. On the surface, it's easy to see why people are amused by this number. It's a comical number and an inconceivable amount. It's really much harder to look at this critically and take a step back to really look at the big picture to see how perverted and deranged both Diddy and the people around him are. It's always going to be easy to take a look at a comical amount of lube and really focus on that. And I don't blame anyone for focusing on this one particular part. It's much harder to take a step back and to realize the generational trauma and general destruction that Diddy and his associates have caused. These people have been victimized, violated, blackmailed, used, and discarded. I think the most public example of this, besides Cassie, his longtime girlfriend, and definitely something we will be talking about in this video, are both Usher and Justin Bieber. Usher was only 13 when he was taken in by Diddy and his associates. He was introduced not only to fame and to music, but also the lifestyle that Diddy has been living and is currently living.
And I lived with Sean Puffy Combs for a year.
That's the crazy thing. Now, that was L.A. Reid's idea, right? We're sending you over to something called Puffy Flavor Camp.
There you go.
To learn
Flavor Camp.
Yeah,
Flavor
that's what it was called. And you're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
In the 90s, do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle.
Right.
And I saw it. And it was but I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at. It was pretty wild.
So nobody tried to, some woman didn't come along.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that. What I did say is that there were very curious things taking place. And I didn't necessarily understand it.
Years later, Usher is in the same position and is able to bring in a new pop star, as we all know, is Justin Bieber. And Bieber is from that point brought into the industry, brought into the lifestyle, and handed over to Diddy. And there are years of evidence of what this has done to him.
Because humanity's, it's come to a place of being really, it's broken. I mean, it's just look around. I mean, the pain that's, so much pain. And, yeah. I don't know, man.
Now, we all know that Justin Bieber hasn't always been the best role model. He's done some really crappy things, some things as just a teenager that can be excused, some things that are bigger that you wonder how he got away with it. And I'm not excusing any of those things. I'm truly not. However, this pattern and these things that are now coming to light can serve as an explanation, not an excuse. but an explanation.
As soon as you turn 16, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna let you rock this every time you come to LA. Yeah, this gonna be yours. So every time you come to LA.
Woo. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna be driving this next year.
Yeah, when you get 16, you come down there, you gotta, wear your seat.
I mean, I'm 15. You could ride in the passenger seat. I got my permit already.
And then when you get 18, you get the house. You get the mansion.
Okay. I get the mansion.
Yeah, so check this out, yo. Justin, you ever seen the movie 48 Hours? Right now, he's having 48 hours with Diddy, him and his boy. They're having the times of their lives, like, where we hanging out and what we doing. We can't really disclose, but it's definitely a 15-year-old's dream.
Starting to act different, huh? You ain't been calling me and hanging out the way we used to hang out.
It's called He's Bad Boy Now. It's called Don't Ever Play Yourself. Bad boy, bad boy. My bitch, I'ma break it again. Feds keeping the spot. Hey, stays outside like them Yeezys go dry. Yeah, she think. Watch a little bit. You get it back. I'm getting rich.
But some of these first-hand experiences that both Usher and Justin Bieber have gone through have really served to show how dark that picture is. And we definitely don't know everything. That's very clear. There are a lot of rumors going on that I can't substantiate. I don't have any proof to it. I can see the after effect of it and what it has done to both of these people, but I don't know what happened behind closed doors, and neither does anyone else except for the people that were there. Diddy's actions ensured that while people whispered about his parties and things that went on behind closed doors, that to the general public, there was very little information coming out. And he did this by controlling every aspect of his victims' lives. This was through physical violence, through directing their careers, intimidating them, threatening them, and even blackmailing them from footage of things they should have had to go through to begin with. We all saw what he did to Cassie when she finally tried to escape from him in a hotel. She left while he was occupied in a shower, but even still, she wasn't quick enough to escape him. I can't necessarily show the full footage here because it is disturbing and it is violent, but there is a video clearly of Diddy yanking her, pulling her, beating her, punching her, and kicking her. And finally, dragging her back to the hotel room that she just escaped, not even minutes beforehand.
The video appears to show Combs punching and kicking the R&B singer who was his longtime girlfriend at the time. You may remember she filed a lawsuit against Combs, but it was settled the day after it was filed. After that, several more lawsuits were filed in the following months, along with a federal criminal sex trafficking investigation.
This solid evidence of his character, who he is, and how he treats the people around him came out before these charges really happened.
In 2010, Mila alleges that she heard Cassie being physically abused and was a witness to the aftermath of the alleged attack. She joins me now.
But all I could think of was to grab Cassie's things and start packing it up and just getting her out to safety. And once she came out of the room, she was badly, beaten.
Oh my God, what did her physical appearance look like?
I mean, it was knots on her head, black eye, busted lip, but a lot of knots all over her head.
And for some reason, Diddy thought he could excuse it. I'm sure that's how he thought this entire thing would go and all of these charges would go. He thought he could admit to being a bad person, apologize for it, and that everyone would move on. Which led to one of the worst apology videos I have ever seen, and that includes the ukulele one.
The only thing I've ever groomed is my 2 Persian cats. I'm not a groomer, I'm just a loser.
Here is what he decided would be an appropriate apology. You can decide for yourselves.
It's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times in your life. Sometimes you gotta do that. I was fucked up. I mean, I hit rock bottom. But I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy, and go into rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
In fact, from everything that I have seen after the fact, some, if not all, of the public push for investigation of Diddy seem to stem from this video. If it hadn't have come out, I don't know if he would have had these charges, and certainly wouldn't have had them so quickly. But the push from the public to say that this person needs to be investigated, if he's done this once, he's done it before and will do it again, is an interesting fact to me. And among the other evidence listed from law enforcement on this indictment was several firearms, including 3 AR-15s that had the serial numbers removed, filed off, whatever you want to call it. Now, we can always get into the debate of weapons and whether or not they should be around, but no matter who you are, everyone knows you can't file off a serial number, and adding a drum magazine to an already high-powered assault rifle just seems wildly inappropriate. These weapons were apparently used to intimidate witnesses and victims alike, which I assume would work in most cases, and not only because that's a weapon and something to be scared of, but it's also an industry-wide secret that Diddy and his associates were ultimately responsible for the murder of famed rapper and revolutionary Tupac. Now, he may not have pulled the trigger himself, as proven. However, there's been a lot of indication from people involved that he is responsible for the payment and the order. Now, that is not included in this indictment. However, I don't believe it's a coincidence that there was an arrest on that case, obviously many, many years later. And since that arrest, we now have some new charges on Diddy that have never existed before. I do believe they are connected. No, I cannot prove it. At least not yet. There was also an instance in the 90s with girlfriend at the time, J-Lo. There was a shooting at a club. One of their associates was ultimately blamed, charged, and arrested. However, there are many witnesses, even years later, stating that it was in fact Diddy and J-Lo responsible for that, and he was paid off to take the fall. Again, I can't quite prove that, at least not yet. But in the next follow-up, I will be doing a deeper dive into that and some other accusations that aren't necessarily listed on this indictment. Back to the current indictment, which is publicly available and also listed in the description below. I think it is publicly understood that there are some really dark things that have and are happening around Diddy and his associates. But I think the scale of which that's happening isn't necessarily sinking in with a lot of people. For instance, the part where it is described that the victims were injured in these mass SA incidents were not allowed to leave, sometimes being kept for days or weeks at a time to recover from these injuries. Not only did it take them that long to recover from these injuries, but they were held by Diddy and his team until they did recover from those injuries. That thought alone has truly haunted me since reading this indictment. I just can't imagine the pain that these people have had to go through and endure and then recover from, all by the people that caused those injuries to begin with. And those injuries weren't specifically listed as to what they were, but regardless of what they were, they shouldn't have happened, and it's disgusting that they did. There are 15 pages that act as a summary of his horrific actions, the details of which will be revealed in the trial itself. But even this summary is frankly terrifying. All of his actions were described, including his efforts to keep his own secrets, which even sometimes escalated into arson. And for these to be specifically listed in indictment, there has to be someone that's discussing this directly. Now, whether it's a witness, whether it's a victim, or whether there are other people whose charges are probably pending, trying to save their own skin and giving out whatever scrap of info they can. Even in that case, with someone who's trying to save their own skin, they're not going to admit to more than what they need to, So if this is the minimum that's being admitted to, what else is going to come out after the fact? At least 2 of the times the victims were threatened, Diddy recorded those calls himself, leaving even more evidence of his depravity. At this point, his compliance and his brazenness of his own criminal activities is concerning. It shows how comfortable he was in his situation, how far he was able to go, because no one checked him. The indictment also goes on to describe the distribution of drugs and other substances, though it is not clear if that distribution was solely for these freak offs or if there was a wider drug network that we're unaware of, but I would anticipate more charges coming in reference to that as well. I think that one of the more concerning parts was how large this operation was. He was not only taking victims from his own city, from his own state, from his own country, he was also recruiting, kidnapping, and victimizing people internationally. Those people were transported, hence that charge on the indictment, and forced to participate in these lewd sex acts, all of which qualify for the charge of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. With that charge naturally comes transportation for the purposes of prostitution. If you take victims over state lines or from different countries to be victimized in your home, you have to transport them, which is where that charge comes from. This charge has also been used to show intent, as it historically has been. Not only are you taking the time to victimize someone, you are taking the time to victimize someone that's not even in your immediate radius, and you're taking them from that area to your own personal place to victimize, use, and discard them. So this shows that it was very purposeful of an act. While it can seem like a less severe charge, it is just as severe in the eyes of the law. Because of everything listed, as well as the evidence I'm sure we have not yet heard about, Diddy was of course arrested. Prior to his arrest, he did relocate to New York in anticipation of these charges and arrest. And I'm not a legal expert, but it is concerning that he had so much of a heads up. They were obviously able to gather a ton of evidence, but I do have to wonder, if he had so much of a heads up, what sort of evidence was he able to and have the time to get rid of? How much of it was destroyed, moved, or otherwise altered that we will never know about? His own lawyer stated that he was aware formal charges were coming back in March when his mansion was raided. Since being arrested, Diddy, as well as his legal team, have offered a multitude of different things to serve as bail. He has offered cash, and he has offered his own mansion and other properties as collateral, some of that totaling up to $50 million. Which was rejected not once, but twice. It was rejected initially, they appealed that decision, and then it was denied again upon that appeal. I find that to be an excellent indicator of the evidence collected, as well as probable pending charges. Him and his associates all had their passports confiscated by the government to make sure that no one flees justice, the government, or these charges. I also find that interesting that they specifically took his associates' passports as well, despite no current charges being filed. That does tell me that charges will be coming for them, we just haven't heard about them yet. So now that Diddy is in jail, how is that treating him? How is he feeling? Although he has been there briefly, he's also deeply affected by it already. He was even placed on a watch, which at this point has mixed reports of whether or not that's for his own safety, as in from himself, or if that's for the purposes of other inmates that seem to have indicated that it would be a badge of honor to take out Diddy himself. With all of that said, in my opinion, this is the tip of the iceberg. More charges are coming for Diddy, more charges are coming for the people around him, and the details of those charges are going to be horrendous. This is very much an ongoing case, it is far from finished, and I will be here to dissect all of it as it comes out. Again, there will be multi-parts to this video, including some to go back into some historical things that weren't covered in depth in this first part. I again want to state that this is all of my own opinion, besides the listed facts. This is technically still all alleged because he has not been found guilty. This is just an initial indictment, and I also really appreciate every one of you stopping by to watch this. If you want the follow-up, please don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get all the relevant information. This is Cole of the Cole Truth, and this case is not yet closed.